You are not part of this family. Ryan, I don't care how much money you throw at us." My father's words weren't shouted. They were dismissed calm, cold, and definitive. And somehow that was worse. They came at the peak of a Thanksgiving dinner I had spent weeks preparing. I had roasted, baked, polished, cleaned, planned, arranged for what a seat at a table I paid for but was never truly welcome at. I'm Ryan Carter, 28 years old, senior analyst at Beacon Financial in Boston, bachelor, dog dad, good tipper, spreadsheet guy, also former son. And over the last 3 years, I've paid $32,000 in mortgage payments, car repairs, property taxes, and mystery emergencies to support my parents. Because that's what family does, right? That's what I kept telling myself, until the bill came due. Before I walk you through the Thanksgiving that blew my life into pieces, and yes, I do mean documented on video, take a second and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And hit that like button if you've ever been the one holding everyone together while falling apart yourself. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's not just about betrayal, it's about waking up. 3 weeks earlier, everything was different. It was a Tuesday afternoon, crisp and golden, and I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of Beacon Financial's 34th floor conference room. From there, the Charles River looked like a silver ribbon curling through Boston. I had just finished presenting a 2-month project, my project analyzing risks in emerging green energy markets. High-stakes stuff, the kind of portfolio everyone else was too scared to touch. Jennifer, my boss and longtime mentor, pulled me aside into her office. She shut the door softly, leaned against her mahogany desk, and smiled in that rare, unguarded way that made her look 10 years younger. "The board didn't just love your analysis. Ryan," she said, voice warm. They were blown away. "You saw angles no one else did. The promotion is official. Senior analyst, effective immediately." A wave of heat rose up through my chest. 5 years of 70-hour weeks, of sacrificing weekends and social life, of watching friends buy homes while I clung to a lease. It was real now. No more maybe next quarter. This was go look at condos money. This was buy a house with a balcony and a view money. This was freedom. I called Ethan the second I left Jennifer's office. We met our freshman year at Harvard. We once survived an entire semester on gas station sandwiches and instant ramen. He answered on the first ring. "You are now speaking to Beacon's newest and possibly most brilliant senior analyst," I said, grinning into the phone. Ethan practically shouted, "Get out!" "No way, bro, I knew it. Tonight we celebrate, Capitol Grill, top floor, my treat." "Hold on, I think I can actually afford it now." We both laughed. That kind of laugh that tastes like oxygen after being underwater too long. While he ranted about steaks and martinis, I pulled up Zillow on my second monitor. There it was. My dream condo in Brooklyn. 3rd floor of a classic brownstone. Iron balcony, quiet street. A small kitchen that practically begged for midnight grilled cheeses. I pictured myself out there next summer, beer in hand, watching the sun filter through leaves, no roommates, no family obligations, just silence and space that belonged to me. Then my phone buzzed again. Mom. My stomach flipped like it had been trained to. I picked up, tried to sound breezy. "Hey, Mom." "Ryan." "Sweetie," she said, in that sugary voice that always meant one thing. She wanted something. "I hate to bother you at work, really I do," she said. "But we've hit a tiny emergency. Your father's car transmission's completely shot. The mechanic says it's going to be at least $900, and with property taxes due next week." "Well," she trailed off into a soft, theatrical sigh, the kind meant to pierce my ribs. I closed the Zillow tab. "Goodbye, iron balcony." "What's the mechanic's name?" I asked. "Just text it to me." "Oh, Ryan, you're our savior. What would we even do without you?" I didn't answer. I hung up, stared at the skyline. Boston still glittered, but I felt like I was trapped behind glass watching a life that belonged to someone else. I had the means, but not the permission. Because this wasn't new. 3 years ago, my dad had called me from the porch, voice shaky, defeated. He'd been laid off from the factory after 20 years. "Don't worry, Dad," I'd said, 25 and so stupidly hopeful. "I've got you. I'll cover the mortgage, just until you find something new." Just until had become always Every first of the month, $1 and $800 vanished from my account, utilities, car insurance, co-pays, $32,000. The exact down payment on that Brooklyn condo. I called Ethan back. "Cancel the reservation," I said, voice flat. He didn't need to ask why, he just sighed. Another emergency. The car, this time. "When are you gonna stop?" "Ryan," he said. Not unkindly, "They're not gonna stop. This is who they are." "They're my parents," I said. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," he snapped. "You're not helping them. You're subsidizing them. You're their retirement fund, not their son. That's a big difference." His words stung, not because they weren't true, but because I had always believed, deep down, that maybe one more good deed, one more grand gesture, and they'd finally see me. Not as the quiet one, not as the backup plan, not as the wallet, but as a son they were proud of. That's when it hit me. Maybe I just needed to show them. I didn't need to say anything. I just needed to invite them in. "I'm hosting Thanksgiving this year," I blurted into the phone. "I'll cook everything. They'll come here. They'll see the life I built." Silence. Then "Ethan, dude, you sure that's a good idea? You remember what happened last Christmas? This will be different." I said it before I could stop myself, because that part of me, the kid who still wanted to be chosen, was louder than my logic. "I'm gonna make the perfect Thanksgiving. They'll see me then. They'll have to." Ethan exhaled like he was giving up. "You're walking into fire with a bucket of gasoline." He wasn't wrong, but I had already started writing the guest list. I had already bookmarked pie recipes. And deep down, I believed this time would be different. It wasn't. It started with a Google Doc. Title: Operation Thanksgiving Redemption. Yeah, I actually named it. I gave myself 2.5 weeks to plan a holiday experience that would showcase everything I had become professionally, personally, financially. The plan was simple. If they couldn't see me as worthy before, I'd make it impossible not to see me now. This wasn't just about turkey and pie. This was about proving that I had value, that I mattered, that I was worth the $32,000 I'd already given and then some. I began with the menu, not from some online blog or mass-produced recipe set. I dove into the science behind it. I read articles on the Maillard reaction, how amino acids and sugars created that perfect golden crust on roasted meat. I learned how chilling your pie dough overnight improved flakiness. I bought a $120 meat thermometer because precision, apparently, was my new love language. I scouted ingredients from local farmers markets and Beacon Hill's overpriced boutique grocers, organic sweet potatoes, fresh rosemary, real maple syrup imported from Vermont, Gruyere for the potato gratin, no store-brand cheddar in this kitchen. The bill, $352.47. I didn't even blink. Because this wasn't food, this was symbolism on a plate. As the day drew closer, I scrubbed my apartment like it was going on the market. I polished the brass fixtures in the bathroom, rearranged bookshelves so the serious titles faced outward, and even bought linen napkins, the kind you wash, not toss. Each place setting had a name card, handwritten, under each plate. I folded a custom-printed sheet of paper. It read, "In the last 3 years, this is what I've given to this family," followed by a breakdown of every major expense. Mortgage, $64,800. Utilities, $5,040. Car repairs, $4,300. Emergency transfers, $3,500. Groceries, tolls, gas, incidentals, $2,500. Total $80, $140. Was it petty? Maybe, but I was tired of acting like all this was normal. And the napkins, I almost forgot. They were the final touch, ivory linen, monogrammed with the words "Welcome Home," all caps, embroidered in navy thread. I had them done by a local Etsy seller who asked, "Is this for a wedding?" And I'd smiled and said, "No, just trying to make something feel like family." I didn't add the part about it being a test, because that's what it was. I was setting a trap made of good intentions, and I wanted so badly for them to pass. Thanksgiving morning, I was up at 5:00 a.m., apron tied tight. The apartment smelled like butter, cinnamon, and ambition. I had 5 timers running. My spreadsheet had timestamps. 5:30, remove pie dough from fridge. 6 begin turkey prep, butter under the skin. 7:45, Begin sweet potato puree. 9 thawed sear Brussels sprouts. 10. Sozro. Make whipped cream from scratch. Because, obviously, I wasn't using Ready Whip, I had dignity. Everything was laid out like a magazine spread. 2 pies cooled by the window, pumpkin with maple syrup and Dutch apple with crumble topping. The turkey a masterpiece, golden, crispy skin, juices locked in. The table gleamed, candles flickered. Jazz played softly in the background. Even the wine Pinot Noir and Chardonnay was perfectly matched to the menu. I stood back and looked at it all. This wasn't just dinner, it was my manifesto. The doorbell rang. My mother, Linda, was first. She stepped in wearing pearls and a cashmere cardigan, eyes darting over every surface. Her smile flickered when she saw the setup. She held a grocery store bag. I brought dessert, she chirped, pulling out a supermarket pumpkin pie in a foil tin, you know the kind $5.99 on sale if you buy 2. I blinked, then smiled, tight-lipped. Oh, thank you. Mom, I made a couple pies already, but hey, more is more, right? I placed it far from the homemade ones, far enough to send a message, but not far enough to look rude. She stepped toward the dining table, ran a finger along the gold-trimmed plate. These are nice, she said. Are they dishwasher safe that gold might rub right off? I'll wash them by hand, I said. Special occasion. Her gaze shifted to the turkey. Are you sure that's cooked through? It doesn't look as brown as mine usually gets. I used a meat thermometer, I said, holding up the $120 model. She nodded, clearly unimpressed. So the test had begun. The next knock came 10 minutes later. Jason, my younger brother, golden child, walking cologne ad. He came in with his new girlfriend, Megan's sweet smile, fall-colored scarf, visibly nervous. She handed me a bouquet of sunflowers. Thank you so much for having us. Ryan, your place is beautiful, and something smells amazing. Thanks. Megan, really glad you could come. She meant it, I could tell. Jason didn't bring anything, not even wine. He strolled in like he owned the place, hands in pockets. Mom swooped in. Jason, honey, you look so handsome. Chicago treating you well? She hugged him tight, longer than she ever hugged me, and I realized something. I could feed them, house them, pay their bills, but Jason would always get the warmth. I glanced at the table. The place cards were still there, the linen napkins still folded, still bearing welcome home. But something inside me started to fray. Then Dad walked in. Harold Carter, ex-factory manager, now full-time recliner philosopher. He nodded at me, then turned immediately to Jason. Look at you, son, new jacket. Yeah, from Natalie, Jason said. She got it in Milan. I stood there, apron still on, butter stains on my shirt, fingers trembling slightly from hours of prep, and not one had said anything about the food, about the setup, about the fact that I was trying. Dinner began, small talk, turkey carving. Jason held court, talking about Chicago, deals, gym memberships. Mom bragged about Jason's bonus. Dad launched into a story about kids these days not understanding hard work. I passed out plates, poured wine, bit my tongue, smiled like a host is supposed to. Then Mom's fork tapped her plate. What's this under my charger, she said, sliding out the folded breakdown I'd printed. Jason followed, lifting his. Dad frowned and unfolded his with a snort. I waited, heart pounding, mouth dry. This was it. Let them see. But instead of gratitude, or even acknowledgement, Mom laughed, not mean, not cruel, just amused. Ryan, sweetie, you've been keeping track? Jason raised an eyebrow. Dude, seriously? Dad shook his head. You really think this makes you family? Then he said it. You're not part of this family. Ryan, doesn't matter how much you spend. And in that moment, I realized something colder than the pie still in the fridge. They never came to see me. They came to eat. Silence. That awful kind of silence that doesn't just sit in a room, it spreads, fills every inch like smoke, thick and stinging. The words still rang in my ears like a siren. You're not part of this family. I looked down at my plate, stuffing half-eaten, cranberry sauce smeared at the edge, and something inside me started to calcify. Not just sadness, not even anger. It was something heavier, Final. Jason sipped his wine like he hadn't just witnessed an emotional decapitation. Megan glanced between us, eyebrows creased, clearly unsure whether to speak or sit perfectly still like a hostage. Dad didn't even flinch. He stabbed another slice of turkey and chewed like it was just another Thursday. Mom waved her hand as if swatting a fly. "Oh, Harold, don't be dramatic." Then, to me, "You know your father doesn't mean things the way they come out." Didn't mean it. He had said it with all the precision of a man laying down a verdict. I took a slow breath. "Is that how you really feel?" My voice cracked at the edges. No heat, just tremor, like a fault line starting to shift. Dad didn't even look up. He just kept slicing turkey. "Calm as a surgeon. You keep score like it's a competition," he said. "But family isn't a business. You don't buy your way in." Jason snorted. "Yeah, man, that spreadsheet thing, it was kinda creepy, not gonna lie." I turned to him slowly. "You mean the one where I itemized the mortgage payments, utilities, repairs your plane tickets for Mom's birthday?" I didn't raise my voice, but the air tightened. Megan's eyes widened. "You paid for that trip?" she asked Jason. He blinked, shrugged. "Well, I was between jobs." "Between jobs for 16 months, I said. Jason leaned back, arms crossed, smirking like a kid called into the principal's office. "You think money makes you better?" I let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, but tasted like ash. "I don't think it makes me better. I think it made all this possible." I gestured around the table, the candles, the food, the linen napkins with "Welcome Home" embroidered in perfect navy thread. No one touched theirs. "Ryan," Mom started, placing her fork down like she was preparing to deliver a sermon. "You've always been the practical one, and yes, you've helped a lot. We all appreciate it." She smiled like a flight attendant explaining turbulence. "But don't you think you take things too personally? Not everything is about feeling owed something." I felt heat rising in my throat. Owed. I stood up slowly. Not dramatic, just upright. "You think this dinner, this whole setup, was about being owed?" They all looked at me like I'd lost it, but I was finally seeing things clearly. "This wasn't a transaction," I said. "This was me trying to be seen, for once, just seen." I turned toward the kitchen. The smell of roasted garlic and warm apples still hung in the air. For a second, I thought about dumping the entire pie into the trash. But no, the pie wasn't the problem. They were... Megan, bless her heart, tried to lighten the mood. "This stuffing's really good. Ryan, did you use sage or thyme?" I smiled at her, gently. "Both." She smiled back, then immediately dropped her eyes again. She knew. She felt it too. This wasn't dinner anymore. It was dissection. I sat down again. Slower this time. Jason was already texting under the table. Mom pulled out her reading glasses to check the wine label. Dad scraped his fork across his plate with deliberate slowness. Ethan's voice rang in my mind. "You're not their son. You're their support system." And then came the final blow. Mom looked at my linen napkins and said, "These are fancy Etsy." I nodded. She smiled. "Seems like a waste. They'll probably stain." And just like that, the last thread snapped. I stood up, calmly, lifted my wine glass. "I'm really glad you all came." They looked up, surprised by my tone. "I needed tonight." Dad grunted, confused. "You okay, kid?" I smiled. "I am now." I clinked my glass softly against the empty one next to me, then took my plate, walked to the kitchen, and slid the entire thing stuffing, turkey, everything into the trash. Mom gasped, "Ryan?" I turned, still smiling. "I'm not hungry anymore." Jason stood up, half laughing. "Drama much?" But I was already walking down the hallway, into my bedroom. I closed the door behind me, calmly, and locked it. Behind the silence, I could hear whispers. "What's wrong with him? Is he serious? Ungrateful?" Ungrateful. I paid for every light bulb in this house. I kept that roof over their heads while they criticized my ceilings. I gave them everything, and they gave me what? Insults, cold turkey, and a supermarket pie. I sat on the edge of my bed, shoes still on, outside. Boston glittered beyond the blinds, but in that moment, it felt distant, like another version of my life, one I almost lived. I thought of the Brooklyn condo I didn't buy, the promotion I didn't celebrate, the napkins they didn't touch. I thought of the word family, how heavy it sounded when spoken with guilt. and how light it felt when spoken with love. And I made a decision. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. I lay there on top of the covers, still in my jeans and shirt, staring at the ceiling as the digital clock beside me ticked toward morning. My apartment, once warm with candlelight and jazz, had gone cold. The kitchen still smelled like roasted garlic and regret. In the next room, dishes sat untouched, napkins unread, a pie cooling, forgotten by the people who forgot me. And somewhere between 300 and 400 a.m., something shifted. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even grief. It was stillness, that quiet clarity people talk about when they say they've finally had enough. I had. I'd been funding their lives for 3 years, thinking love would trickle back like dividends. I'd handed over down payments, repairs, insurance premiums, all under the banner of duty and sonship. But the truth? I'd just been paying rent for a role I never got to play. At 7:15 a.m., I got up, poured myself the cold coffee from the pot I'd brewed yesterday, and walked over to my laptop. I opened my bank's homepage. Then I clicked on the recurring transfer titled Carter Household Mortgage Support. I hovered over the active status, then clicked Cancel. A confirmation window popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this transfer? Yes, hell yes. That was step 1, but it wasn't enough. No, this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about resetting the dynamic they had come to rely on. No confrontation, no shouting, just consequences. So I made a list, because that's what I do. When emotions get messy, I make lists. Operation Exit Strategy. Cancel all financial support, mortgage, utilities, insurance. Draft formal notice of financial separation sent via email and physical letter. Contact family lawyer, re-tax implications, if any. Pull out of shared family phone plan. Cut Jason's gym membership from my card. Block all Venmo requests. Cold, maybe, but they'd spent years pretending the money didn't matter. So now, I'd act like it didn't either. Around noon, I called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring, his voice scratchy. Yo, you okay? No, I said, but I'm awake. There was a pause, then he said, talk to me. I told him everything what Dad said, how they laughed at the napkins, the spreadsheet mockery, the total dismissal. He didn't say I told you so, he just breathed through it with me. Then he asked, so what now? I'm done, I said, like done. I told him about the bank transfer, the letter, the list. He whistled low. You're really doing it. Yeah, I said, it's not revenge, it's freedom. Same thing, he muttered, just dressed nicer. That afternoon, I wrote the letter, simple, clear, legal sounding. Dear Mom and Dad, as of December 1st, I will no longer be financially supporting the Carter household in any capacity. This includes the mortgage, utilities, car repairs, insurance payments, and emergency transfers. This is not an act of malice. This is a boundary, something I should have established years ago. You are both adults. Jason is an adult. You've raised me to be self-sufficient. I trust you'll lean on each other as I have leaned on myself. I am no longer available as your safety net, but I remain someone who once wanted to be your son. Ryan. I hit print, folded 2 copies, stamped 1 envelope, emailed the other. Sent, done, gone. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I opened Zillow again. There it was, the condo in Brooklyn, still listed, still 3rd floor brownstone, still the balcony. But now, it wasn't just a dream, it was an option. I emailed the agent, asked for a virtual tour. She responded within 20 minutes. Hi Ryan, we're holding an open house this Sunday, want to swing by? I stared at that sentence for a full minute. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with release. The next day, my mom called. I didn't pick up. She called again, then Jason, then Dad, then all 3. Voicemails. Ryan, please call us. Your father's upset. Jason's worried. This isn't how family behaves. I didn't respond, not out of spite, out of principle. I needed them to sit in the silence they created. Let them feel the weight of their own absence. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was one of the napkins, ivory linen, welcome home still bright. And a note, scribbled in Mom's handwriting. We didn't mean to hurt you, but you're not the only one who's tired. I stared at it for a long time. Was it an apology? A guilt trip? A cry for help? I couldn't tell, but it didn't matter. I folded the napkin again, slid it into the drawer beside my desk, and opened a new one labeled Brooklyn Applications. Then, just as I was about to shut the laptop, my phone buzzed. One new text from Jason. Hope you're happy. Bro, Dad's thinking about selling the house. No punctuation, just blame like always, but this time, it didn't land. Because finally, for the first time in my adult life, I didn't owe them anything. I didn't respond to Jason's message. I didn't ask about the house, didn't offer advice, didn't flinch. Because for once, their chaos wasn't my responsibility. But part of me couldn't help wondering, was Dad bluffing? Was he really considering selling the house? Or was that Jason's way of luring me back in with guilt? Either way, it wasn't my job to rescue them anymore. The silence from me had become louder than any lecture I could give, and the longer I kept it up, the more cracks I started to see in their carefully curated illusion of control. Ethan called again 2 days later. So, how's the post-apocalyptic family fallout going? I laughed. For real this time, quiet, suspiciously quiet. You know what that means, right? They're planning something. He chuckled, or scrambling. Either way, you win. He was right. I wasn't raging, I wasn't grieving, I was planning. The open house in Brooklyn was set for Sunday. I took the train down alone. Earbuds in, playlist full of songs I used to listen to in college when the world still felt like it was mine to shape. The condo was even better in person. High ceilings, exposed brick, French windows that flooded the space with light, a tiny balcony overlooking a tree-lined street, the kind of quiet that felt earned. The real estate agent, Marcy, asked if I had financing in place. I handed her a pre-approval letter I'd been sitting on for 6 months. I'm ready, I told her, and I meant it. That night, as I sat in a Brooklyn cafe sipping burnt decaf, my phone lit up. Another text from Jason, short, cold. You made your point. Dad stopped talking to anyone. You happy? I stared at the message. Part of me wanted to reply I didn't make my point. He did. I just stopped subsidizing it. But I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my notes app and started something new. Working title, The Family Receipt, an essay. Maybe a Medium post, maybe something more. Not for revenge, for release. I started writing about what it means to be the responsible child, the one who gets called when the car won't start, the one who's praised in public but ignored in private, the emotional first responder and financial backer, the invisible lifeboat. Then the twist. Late Thursday evening, Ethan forwarded me a Facebook post from my mom. Public, tagged, visible to everyone. A grainy photo of the Thanksgiving dinner table, my table captioned, "So grateful for family, even when they drift, hoping time will bring healing. Hashtag blessed, hashtag thankful, hashtag forgiveness." No mention of my name, no acknowledgement of what happened, but the comments, people ate it up. You're such a strong mom, they always come back. Stay in prayer, family is everything. It felt like a punch to the gut. I had hosted, cooked, paid, and now, she was rewriting the story, polishing it for public consumption, playing the martyr. That's when I made my final move. I scanned every receipt from the last 3 years' mortgage payments, Venmo screenshots, auto repairs, even the damn birthday balloons for Dad's retirement party. Then I uploaded them to a private Google Drive folder. I called it For My Therapist or Lawyer. Not for exposure, not for revenge, but because truth deserves a place to live. And then I sent one email. Subject line clarity, recipient's mom, dad, Jason. This is the last time I will reach out. I'm aware of the Facebook post. I am not angry, just done. Going forward, all financial contributions from me are permanently ceased. Please do not contact me unless it's about mutual closure. I wish you the very best. Ryan. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Jason. Voicemail. He didn't even text this time. I played it on speaker, his voice shaky, rushed. Hey, man, I know you're pissed. And yeah, maybe things got messed up. But Dad's serious, he's meeting with a realtor next week. If the house sells, it's gone. I don't know where they'll go. Mom's crying every night. I know you're mad, but you don't have to, like, nuke everything. Just think about it, okay? I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by half-packed moving boxes and my half-finished essay. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not out of joy, but from the absence of carrying everything. Still, something about Jason's tone didn't sit right. The urgency, the panic. He wasn't warning me, he was managing me. And just like that, another thought snapped into place. They weren't falling apart, they were staging a crisis. Because Jason had always known which strings to pull, and I was the one who tied them. The realtor was real. Ethan, ever the bloodhound for inconsistencies, ran a quick Google search after I forwarded Jason's voicemail. The man existed licensed, credible, 5-star reviews, and had a listing up for a charming colonial in Newton with family history and strong bones. Their house, my childhood home. So maybe this wasn't just theater. Maybe they were actually about to sell? But the question lingered like a bad echo. Why now? They could have sold it any time over the last 3 years. Why only after I cut them off? That weekend, I drove past the house. I hadn't done that in years. The for sale sign was up, planted right where I used to ride my bike in circles as a kid. A red balloon hung limply from the post left over from the open house. Maybe, or someone's sad attempt at celebration. Through the front window, I could see Dad standing with the realtor, gesturing toward the fireplace like it was sacred. A part of me braced for guilt, nostalgia, even sadness. But all I felt was distance. Like I was watching a memory I no longer starred in. Back in my car, I texted Ethan. They're really doing it. He replied in seconds. Or pretending to. Want me to call the realtor as a buyer? I stared at the screen. Ethan didn't ask that lightly. He knew me well enough to recognize that what I was doing wasn't just detachment, it was closure with intention. But I typed back, "No, let them list it, let them try." And then I added, "But track the sale. I want to know if it actually closes." Because a house can sit on the market forever, empty, full of ghosts, like our whole family dynamic. Then came the betrayal I didn't see coming. It wasn't from Mom, not from Dad. It was from Megan, Jason's girlfriend. She DM'd me, out of nowhere, neutral tone, no emojis, just the facts. "Hey, just so you know, Jason's been telling people you're suing the family. Says you threatened to take the house. People at church think you're going after your parents legally." I blinked at the message, read it twice. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. So many things I wanted to write, I haven't spoken to him in weeks. Why would I sue anyone? That's what guilt does. It lies in defense. Instead, I wrote, "Thanks for letting me know." She replied, "He's spiraling. He told his mom you blocked him. He says you've changed. He thinks the house is his birthright." I didn't answer. What was there to say? Later that night, I opened the linen drawer, the one where I'd stored that single napkin. "Welcome home," still in perfect embroidery. I stared at it for a long while. What did that even mean anymore? Home had become a performance, an obligation I'd graduated from without ceremony, but the napkin still held power. So I folded it, gently, placed it into a box labeled "Do Not Open Until Honest." Then I made my final move. I called the realtor, not as a buyer, as the person who had paid for that home. "Hi," I said. "My name's Ryan Carter. That house you're selling, I financed the last 3 years of it. I'm not contesting the sale, but I do have documentation on file if anyone asks about liens or history." The woman was polite, professional. "Oh, thank you for the transparency. That's good to know." I hung up, didn't gloat, didn't explain. Because this wasn't about punishment anymore. This was about context. If they were going to rewrite the story, I'd make sure the footnotes were accurate. 2 days later, another message from Jason. "What the hell did you tell the realtor? Now she's asking about old payments and who covered what. Dad's pissed. You're sabotaging everything." I stared at it, let it sit there, buzzing. And I typed, "If your lies need silence to survive, maybe they shouldn't survive." He never replied. Ethan dropped by that weekend with 2 things: coffee and a business card. "You still thinking about publishing that essay?" he asked, sipping from his cup. "Yeah," I said, "but it's not just an essay anymore." He smiled. "You thinking book?" I nodded slowly. Not out of revenge, just A blueprint for people like me. People who got cast as the villain just for setting boundaries, he said. Exactly. He handed me the card. His literary agent. I already pitched your story, he said casually. She's intrigued. I blinked. You what? He grinned. You tell the truth like nobody else. Let's put it somewhere it can't be buried. And then came the final twist. Not from my family. From the bank? A letter, thin envelope, plain font. Inside, a notification that the Carter household mortgage had been delinquent for 2 months. Not 1, 2, meaning they'd stopped paying even before Thanksgiving, even before the dinner. They were never stable, never afloat. They were just riding the inertia of my generosity and pretending it was strength. They weren't selling the house because I walked away. They were selling it because they had no choice. The house sold in February. Below asking price. I found the listing on a local real estate archive, buried under a flood of newer, flashier properties. It sat on the market for 47 days before some investor from Ohio scooped it up as a rental. And just like that, the place I grew up in, the kitchen with the wobbly table leg, the hallway where Jason and I raced, the living room where I once taped up my college acceptance letter like a trophy, was gone. No text from mom, no email from dad, not even a forwarded Zillow link. I only found out because I was looking, because part of me still hoped they'd say something, but they didn't. They'd rather lose the house than lose the narrative, and they lost both. Meanwhile, my life was expanding. I signed the lease on the Brooklyn condo that March. My name on the lease, my terms, my money, my space. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, the silence felt earned. No expectations, no favors waiting to be cashed in. I hung exactly one thing on the wall, the napkin, framed, centered above my desk. Welcome home. 3 words I'd finally made real, not a wish, not a lie, a fact. The essay became an article. The article went viral. Turns out, there were more of us than I'd thought. People who'd carried their families through storms only to be blamed when the sun came out. Comments poured in stories eerily similar to mine. My parents called me ungrateful after I paid off their debts. They said I abandoned them when I stopped sending money. I thought love meant sacrifice. Turns out, it just made me invisible. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. Ethan connected me with his agent, and 6 months later, I signed a publishing deal. Working title: The Receipt, Breaking Up with Family Debt. Half memoir, half manifesto, all honest. The manuscript included everything: the spreadsheets, the napkin, even a photocopy of the final mortgage notice redacted for privacy, but unflinching in its reality. I didn't write it for revenge. I wrote it so no one would have to keep explaining why they walked away from people who called themselves family. Then the letter came. Not an email, a real stamped envelope. My name written in my mother's cursive, no return address. Inside, Ryan. We sold the house. We moved in with Aunt Melanie for now. I won't pretend we didn't make mistakes. I also won't pretend we understand everything you did. But I found something in your father's drawer. It was a copy of your college acceptance letter, still folded the way you left it. He never threw it out. I think, in his way, he was proud, just too proud to say it. I'm not asking for anything, just wanted you to know we were listening, even if we were slow to hear. Mom. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't cry, but my throat tightened like it hadn't in years. Not because it fixed anything, but because it proved something I didn't think I'd ever get: acknowledgement. No apology, no reunion. Just the quiet confession that maybe, I hadn't imagined it all. Weeks passed, the book hit shelves. Podcast interviews, talks, a small but fierce community formed: people like me, unlearning the myth of unconditional support when the conditions had always been very real. One night, during a Q&A, a woman stood up and asked, "If they called you tomorrow and really meant it, no manipulation, no guilt, what would you say?" I paused, then answered. I'd say, "Thank you, but I'm already home." So here's the thing. You can outgrow people who raised you. You can love them and still leave. You can build new stories without burning the old ones, even if they never made room for you in the chapters. Walking away doesn't make you cold. It makes you whole. And if you're someone who's ever had to write a letter that started with "I'm done," or sit through a dinner where the food was warm but the company was freezing, or stare at a napkin that said "Welcome home" while knowing no one really meant it, I see you, and you're not selfish, you're free. Story 2. My name is Alex Harper. I'm 32, a marketing consultant based in Columbus, Ohio, and last Thanksgiving, I exposed my uncle in front of our entire extended family for stealing over $87,000 meant for my grandmother's cancer treatment. He didn't flinch, he didn't cry, he smirked, like I was the problem. But let me back up for a moment. I want you to picture this. It's a chilly November evening. My hands are shaking not from the cold, but from the folder of documents I'm gripping so tightly they're crumpling at the corners, around me. My family laughs over turkey and wine, the fireplace crackles, and someone's kids are arguing over who gets the last crescent roll. On the outside, it's a scene straight out of a Hallmark holiday special. On the inside, it's the final act of a betrayal that started months ago, and I'm about to detonate a truth bomb that'll shatter every illusion these people have about family. And before I walk you into that war zone, I need you to know why I did it. My grandmother, Evelyn Harper, is 82. She's the kind of woman who used to bake her own bread, volunteered at the local library well into her 70s, and never forgot a birthday even when chemo had her too weak to hold a pen. She raised 3 sons, survived 2 strokes, and held our entire fractured family together with nothing but molasses cookies and pure stubbornness. Last spring, she got her diagnosis stage 3 ovarian cancer. The doctors were hopeful, but aggressive, chemotherapy, biopsies, a clinical trial, all of it expensive. We didn't come from money, just pride. So we did what modern American families do when tragedy strikes and health insurance barely covers the basics. We started a GoFundMe. It was my cousin Marissa's idea. She's an accountant, quiet, sharp, good with numbers. She set it up, titled it Fight for Grandma Evelyn, and within weeks we had nearly $95,000 raised from extended family, church friends, and even some of Grandma's old coworkers from the post office. I kicked in $7,000 of my own. I had just landed a major client and figured, if there was ever a time to step up, it was now. The money was deposited into a joint account managed by Grandma's youngest son, Uncle Richard. To everyone else, Richard was the reliable one, a former accountant turned small business advisor. He'd taken on power of attorney and was supposedly handling all the logistics of her care. He lived just 15 minutes from her retirement condo. He made all the appointments. He told us everything was being handled. So we trusted him, like idiots. At first, everything seemed okay, until the phone call. It was mid-September. I was juggling spreadsheets at my kitchen table when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Sylvia, billing dept, Mercy Medical. Hi, this is Sylvia from Mercy Medical Center. I'm trying to reach Evelyn Harper's primary family contact. Are you her granddaughter? My stomach dropped. Yes, I said. Is everything okay? A pause, then, well, ma'am, we're calling because several bills from July and August remain unpaid. We've mailed notices to the billing address we were given, Mr. Richard Harper, but we've received no response. I froze. Unpaid, but there's money. We raised over $90,000 for her care. Another pause, longer this time. Ma'am, only $3,200 has been paid toward her account, and her clinical trial application was withdrawn 2 weeks ago. We assumed it was a family decision. It wasn't. That's when the floor gave out beneath me. In the weeks that followed, I did what no one else in my family dared to do. I dug. I pulled Grandma's medical invoices. I called the trial coordinators. I went through every single public-facing update on the GoFundMe dates, receipts, transactions. Nothing lined up. Richard had posted an update in August saying Grandma had begun trial treatment the same day. According to Sylvia, she'd missed an appointment because transportation never arrived. And the payment records the account linked to the GoFundMe had been drained in under 6 weeks. I asked Marissa if she had access to the back end. She hesitated, then sent me a screenshot. She'd been removed as co-manager of the fundraiser 2 months prior by Richard. That night, I drove to Grandma's. She looked tired, smaller somehow, like her body had folded inward from the weight of secrets. I stopped chemo, she whispered, eyes averted. Why Richard said, The side effects were too hard on me, and he said the trial didn't accept me after all. So I just thought maybe it was God's way of saying it's time. She didn't know. She had no idea she'd been robbed of options, of dignity, of time, because someone she loved had decided she wasn't worth the money. That's when I knew. I wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. The plan came together slowly, methodically, like assembling a war map. I printed bank statements, found 3 unexplained transfers totaling over $60,000 to a shell company in Belize that Richard consulted for. Sylvia agreed to send me a notarized summary of unpaid charges, and Carla, my younger cousin finishing law school, offered to help me phrase everything in a way that no one at the dinner table could misinterpret. "I'm not accusing him," Carla said. Her voice clipped. "You're just presenting facts." And so, with that folder crisp, heavy, marked with red post-it tabs, I walked into Thanksgiving like it was a court hearing. I hadn't seen most of them in months. Grandma was there in a wheelchair, looking fragile but radiant in her green cashmere scarf. Richard was refilling wine glasses, laughing like he didn't have blood on his hands. My mother gave me that half hug she reserves for moments when she's unsure if she wants to claim me. I waited until after the pumpkin pie, until Grandma had been wheeled into the den for her nap, until the noise in the room had dipped just low enough. And then I stood, held up the folder. "I need 10 minutes of everyone's time," I said, my voice steady. "And you might want to put down your forks." Everyone froze. Forks halfway to mouths, glasses mid-sip. The only sound was the faint clink of ice in a tumbler as Uncle Barry shifted in his chair. "What's going on?" Alex, my mother asked, her voice all forced politeness and barely concealed dread. I took a deep breath. My palms were slick against the cover of the folder. I set it gently on the dining table right between the gravy boat and the cranberry sauce and opened it. "Just some documents," I said, keeping my tone level. "About the GoFundMe, about Grandma's treatment, about where the money actually went." There was a flicker of confusion across several faces. Aunt Ruth leaned forward, squinting at the papers. My cousin Ben glanced at Richard, who had gone completely still, not blinking, not breathing, just calculating. "I'm not here to cause a scene," I continued, scanning the table, "but I think it's time we all knew the truth, because Grandma didn't stop treatment by choice. She didn't give up, she was cut off." The silence turned thick. You could hear someone's watch ticking. I picked up the first sheet, a color-coded timeline I had built with Carla's help. "This is the GoFundMe donation history," I said. "You'll see that between May and July, over $92,000 was raised. The account was originally co-managed by Marissa and Richard, but in mid-July, Marissa was removed without explanation." Marissa's cheeks flushed. She stared down at her lap. "I didn't want to stir things up," she mumbled. Richard finally spoke. "We agreed it'd be easier if one person managed disbursements, less confusion." "You never asked me," Marissa shot back, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded toward the next document. "This is a payment record from Mercy Medical. Out of that $92,000, only $3,200 was paid toward Grandma's care. And the clinical trial she was promised, she was withdrawn because of non-payment. The rest of the funds." I lifted the final page, a printout of wire transfers. 3 payments, $24,000, $18,000, $19,500, all transferred to a consulting firm registered in Belize under the name Harper Strategic Advisory. I looked Richard dead in the eye. "You're the only Harper in this family with a background in finance, and the only one who's been to Belize twice in the last year." There was a beat of pure, stunned silence. Then, "That's ridiculous," Richard barked. His voice cracked at the end. "You don't understand how these accounts work. I've been moving money around to maximize coverage, taxes, disbursement delays. You don't know the first thing about medical billing." "I might not," I said calmly, "but Sylvia does." I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and held up the speaker. "Hi, this is Sylvia from Mercy Medical. Can I help you?" The room blinked. Some jaws literally dropped. "Hi, Sylvia," I said. "Can you confirm how much was paid on Evelyn Harper's account from July to October?" "Yes," she said. "Only one payment of $3,200 was received in July. No other transactions recorded." "And can you confirm her clinical trial application was withdrawn due to non-payment?" Yes, our system marked it as financially ineligible. I ended the call. Richard stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is a witch hunt. You're twisting things. No, Richard, I said quietly, you did that all by yourself. Grandma stirred from the den. Someone had left the pocket door open, and her wheelchair had quietly rolled into view. She sat there, wrapped in her scarf, eyes wide, lips trembling. I didn't stop treatment, she said, more to herself than anyone else. He told me I wasn't eligible. Grandma. I walked over, knelt beside her. You were eligible. You were perfect. The doctor said you had a strong chance if you'd started on time. Tears welled in her eyes. Why would Richard do that? I couldn't answer. No one could. Aunt Ruth was crying softly now. My brother Tom just stared at the folder, pale as paper. Richard grabbed his coat. This is all twisted. You people don't understand the responsibility I carried. I did what I thought was best. For who? Carla asked, her voice sharp. Grandma or your offshore retirement plan? He didn't reply. The aftermath was a blur. Grandma asked to be taken home early. She barely spoke the whole ride. My mom avoided me for the rest of the evening. My cousins whispered, gathered in corners. Marissa hugged me, hard, before slipping away without a word. Richard left in silence. The next morning, I got a text from him, just 3 words. You'll regret this. And I'll admit part of me did. Not because I was wrong, but because I knew this was just the beginning. Exposing the truth was only step 1. Making it right, that was something else entirely. And yet, something unexpected happened that night. After everyone left, I was helping Grandma to bed when she took off her scarf. Nestled in the folds was a small silver ring worn, faded, the initials EH barely visible. It was her wedding band from 1959. She reached for my hand, pressed the ring into my palm. I want you to have this, she said. It's always been meant for the one who sees clearly. My throat tightened. That ring that was the symbol of trust in our family. She'd let Richard hold on to it after Grandpa died. But now, she had taken it back and passed it to me. Not because I was the favorite, but because I was the only one who refused to look away. And just when I thought things had calmed, 3 days later, a legal notice arrived at my door. From Richard. He was suing me for defamation. The envelope was thick, heavy in my mailbox like a brick of silence waiting to explode. When I saw the return address Richard Harper, via his attorney, I didn't even flinch. I just stood there on my porch in my robe and slippers, coffee forgotten, the morning sun blinding me as I sliced it open with my house key. It was real. He was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and malicious character assassination, in all caps, like drama belonged in bold fonts. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had become so loud. It was easier to laugh than to scream. The man who had stolen from our dying grandmother was painting himself as the victim. I took a deep breath, walked back inside, and placed the notice on my kitchen counter, right beside the silver ring Grandma had given me. It shimmered faintly in the morning light, faint, but solid, real. A symbol of trust and of unfinished business. I knew this lawsuit wasn't about winning. Richard didn't think he could beat me in court. It was about shutting me up, draining my energy, my time, my wallet, classic intimidation tactic. But what he didn't know was I hadn't shown everything I had. Not yet. That weekend, I visited Grandma again. She looked stronger. Not physically, chemo had left its mark, but there was light in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. She'd cut ties with Richard after Thanksgiving, filed a formal complaint at the bank, and even started working with a social worker to reclaim part of her medical access. But she was still fragile, still processing the betrayal. She sat curled up on the couch in a thick wool cardigan, sipping tea. I keep thinking back to that attic, she murmured. There were boxes your grandfather never let me throw away. Financial stuff. He was a pack rat. Bless him. Attic, I asked? She nodded. In the old house, the one we rented out after he passed? That house had been vacant for 6 months. The tenants had just moved out, and Grandma hadn't been back since the funeral. I bet there's still stuff up there, she added. He kept everything. Tax returns from the 70s, letters, journals. He was always terrified someone would forget where we came from. That night, I drove out to the house. It was strange stepping back into that place. The wallpaper was still yellowing in the corners. The living room smelled like dust and forgotten holidays. And the attic stairs creaked like they remembered every argument ever whispered beneath them. I pulled the cord to the overhead light. It flickered, then buzzed to life. Cardboard boxes, dozens of them, some labeled in Grandpa's scrawled handwriting, others anonymous. There were old photo albums, stacks of Reader's Digest, rusted tools. And then I found it. A banker's box, duct-taped shut, labeled HSA, Harper Strategic Advisory. Richard's Company. I sliced the tape with a screwdriver and opened the lid. Inside bank statements, invoices, tax records, some dating back 6 years, and tucked between them, a handwritten ledger with Richard's name all over it. He had used Grandma's name on a number of phantom clients, billing consultations that never happened, transferring funds between dummy LLCs, a classic paper trail one. Grandpa must have sniffed out before he passed, or maybe even gathered to protect her in case things ever went south. But the real smoking gun, a signed contract, with Grandma's forged signature. Richard had opened a credit line using her identity. That was how he was able to absorb such massive cash flows without triggering fraud alerts. I sat there, cross-legged on the attic floor, heart pounding like I'd just found buried treasure. Only this wasn't treasure, it was ammo. And I wasn't done. The next morning, I took the entire box to Carla. She spread the contents across her dining table like a crime scene analyst. This is enough for criminal charges, she said, not just financial misconduct, identity theft, elder abuse, maybe even wire fraud. Can it help with the lawsuit, I asked? Carla looked up at me, a slow grin spreading across her face. Oh, sweetheart, she said, this lawsuit is about to backfire so hard, he's gonna wish he'd just disappeared quietly. We began organizing the files, scanning documents, flagging discrepancies. I called Marissa, who confirmed dates and previous versions of the GoFundMe login. Sylvia, the billing manager, offered to provide a formal affidavit. And then, we made a decision we would go public. Not just in court, but online. The next day, with Grandma's permission, I posted a carefully worded summary of what we'd uncovered on the GoFundMe page itself. It was brief, factual, no insults, just data. Within 48 hours, we had hundreds of comments. People who donated wanted updates. Journalists reached out. A local news station emailed me, asking if I'd give a statement. And just like that, Richard lost control of the narrative. But the moment that broke him, it wasn't legal, it wasn't even public. It was private. That Thursday, Grandma called him. She asked him to return the ring. The one your father gave me in 1959, she said. Voice firm, I let you hold it after he died. You said you'd keep it safe. Richard stammered, I thought I gave that back. You didn't, she replied, and I don't want you to. Not anymore. I want you to know what it means when someone takes something sacred and hides it for personal gain. She hung up before he could answer. That ring sat beside me again as I read through the last affidavit Carla had filed. A legal motion to countersue for damages and to open a full audit. But before I could even sign the final papers, Richard vanished, stopped returning calls, shut down his consulting firm, disconnected his phone. Then one morning, Marissa sent me a photo, a blurry image from her neighborhood HOA group. Richard's car, parked outside a storage unit. She added one line. Yima, you're not going to believe what he's hiding in there. It was a cloudy Tuesday when I pulled into the parking lot of East Ridge Storage, just outside Dayton. The air was damp, thick with that Midwest winter smell concrete, old leaves, and the faint trace of mold. Marissa was already there, leaning against her car with a coffee in one hand and a fire in her eyes. He was here 3 times last week, she said. No greeting, just straight facts, different times, early morning, late night, always alone. We walked up to Unit 208. She'd tracked it through the HOA tip, then checked the registry through a real estate contact. It was rented under one of Richard's shell LLCs, another one of his advisory fronts. I wasn't sure what we'd find. I had hoped for files, maybe a backup hard drive, something to tie the offshore transfers directly to his personal assets. What I didn't expect was what we actually found. The lock wasn't hard to pick. Carla's friend from law school, Marcus, who once interned with a security firm, had advised us on the legal gray area. "If this LLC is tied to financial fraud," he'd said, "and if your grandmother is a victim, you're not breaking and entering, you're gathering evidence for civil protection." We pushed the metal door up, it groaned. Inside was a dim, musty space the size of a one-car garage, cluttered with sealed bins, office boxes, and a safe. Not one of those tiny desk safes either. This was serious. A 4-foot-tall floor model, matte black, keypad locked, bolted to the concrete. I could almost hear Richard's voice in my head. "Always have a fallback. Never trust digital backups." He was old school, paranoid, and smug. Marissa whistled. "That's not cheap." "No," I said, "but what he put in there might cost him a lot more than money." We didn't crack it that night, but I took pictures, logged everything, and documented our presence in a time-stamped video just in case. 2 days later, with Carla beside me and a professional safe technician from her law firm's asset recovery team, we opened it. And inside, everything. Stacks of cash and bands, passports, plural, a thumb drive labeled Q4 Consolidated 2023, private. But the thing that made Carla gasp, a folder, thin, manila, taped shut. Inside were copies of multiple checks made out from Grandma's personal checking account to various hospice services that never existed, signed in pen. Except the handwriting wasn't hers. "I can bring in a handwriting analyst," Carla murmured, flipping through them, "but even at first glance this is forged." It was elder abuse, plain and simple. He hadn't just stolen fundraiser money, he had siphoned money from Grandma's own account under the guise of prepaid care, then buried the paper trail. Back at my apartment, I plugged in the thumb drive. Encrypted, of course, but one folder wasn't locked: archive taxes. Hundreds of PDFs, quarterly filings, breakdown of supposed expenses, a full layout of Harper Strategic Advisory's income, almost none of which matched Richard's IRS filings. He'd created his own internal accounting system, separate from what he submitted to the government, one real, one fake. And it confirmed something we'd only suspected until now. He'd been using Grandma as a business asset, billing consultations under her name, using her GoFundMe donations as seed money for a phony reinvestment loop that made his LLC look profitable. In short, he committed wire fraud, tax evasion, and elder exploitation all in one spreadsheet. We built a file, dozens of pages. Carla submitted them to the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Justice Unit. And then we waited. Which, honestly, was the hardest part. Because even when you do everything right, every call, every form, every rule followed, it still feels like the system moves at glacier speed, and I was running out of patience. Especially when I found out Richard had filed a motion to freeze my bank account, claiming financial retaliation and reputational harm. He was doubling down, and I was ready to strike back. That's when the call came, not from Carla, not from the court. From Sylvia. She had gotten wind of our case from the Attorney General's office, and she had something new. "Alex," she said over the phone, "I think you need to see this. I can't email it, but if you stop by the hospital records office, I can show you something, off the record." The next morning, I drove to Mercy Medical and met her in a back hallway near medical records. She handed me a file plain, no label. "Your grandmother's original intake chart," she whispered, "the one from her second visit in June. It was buried. Someone moved it to an inactive archive folder." I flipped through the pages, notes from the attending physician, vitals, medications. And at the bottom a comment in red ink. "Patient unaware of clinical trial rejection, believes treatment will resume next week. Advised to contact family representative Richard Harper for confirmation." They knew, the staff knew something was wrong, but because Richard had power of attorney, no one had intervened. That's when it hit me. He didn't just delay care. He actively blocked it. He lied to her face, told her treatment would resume, while knowing full well it had already been denied. The drive home felt like a dream. My hands buzzed on the steering wheel, my chest tight, teeth grinding. This wasn't just fraud. This was a slow, calculated assassination of trust. And somehow, even knowing all that, I still wasn't ready for what came next. Because just 2 days later, I got a call from a name I hadn't heard in over 5 years. Darren, my cousin. Richard's estranged son. We hadn't spoken since he left for Arizona after high school. Family drama, something about cutting ties. But now, his voice was low, flat. I heard about Grandma and about the money. Listen, I think you need to know what my dad was doing in 2017, before all this, because this isn't the first time. Darren's voice over the phone was flat, almost numb, like someone who had spent years learning how not to react. He'd reached out late one night, just 2 days after I'd uncovered the forged hospice payments in the storage unit. I barely remembered what he sounded like. He left Ohio years ago, right after graduating high school, and no one had heard from him since. Until now. I don't know how much you already found, he said, but whatever it is, it's only the surface. I closed my laptop and sat up straighter. What are you talking about? There was a pause. My dad, he's been doing this longer than anyone realizes. Grandma's just the most recent. My mouth went dry. I know because it started with my mom. Darren told me things that made my stomach twist into knots. Back in 2017, when he was still in college, his mom, Richard's ex-wife, was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. The symptoms were mild then. Tremors, a little stiffness, the kind of thing most people would manage with medication and some support. But she didn't have good insurance. She was a substitute teacher who never got full benefits, so she turned to Richard for help, believing that despite the divorce, despite everything, he'd at least do right by the mother of his son. At first, he seemed supportive, paid for a few appointments, hired an in-home nurse for a couple weeks. Then the bills stopped getting paid. Medications were delayed, appointments canceled. When Darren confronted him, Richard brushed it off. She's exaggerating. He'd said, "You don't know how manipulative she is. That woman always knew how to work the system." It took Darren months to realize the truth. Richard had been redirecting the insurance reimbursements into one of his consulting accounts, pocketing what little coverage she had and letting her condition worsen until she ended up in assisted living on Medicaid, with no financial support from him whatsoever. I was 19. Darren said, "I didn't know how to fight it. I was scared and ashamed. I thought it was my fault." My hands were trembling by the time he finished, not from shock, but from recognition. Because that same gaslighting, she's exaggerating. You don't know the full story. You're making things worse. That's what Richard had told me, too. Same pattern, same poison. Only now, the dots were connecting faster than I could write them down. "What made you come forward now?" I asked him. Another pause. Then, quietly, "Because I saw what you posted, and because you did what I couldn't." The next day, Darren sent me documents, old emails, medical statements, notes he'd kept. I added them to the ever-growing evidence file Carla was building. That week, we filed a formal report with Adult Protective Services in 2 counties. Carla submitted a request to unseal Richard's prior tax disputes. Turns out he'd been fined twice before for incomplete filings. Nothing criminal, but enough to draw a pattern. We also got word from the Attorney General's office they were opening an investigation. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was a growing tension in my chest. Because if Richard knew what we were putting together, if he sensed how close we were to cornering him, he wouldn't go down quietly. And I was right. 3 nights later, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't steal anything, just rifled through drawers, popped open a filing cabinet, left muddy footprints across my living room floor. No smashed windows, no forced entry. Whoever it was had a key. The only one who ever had a spare was Richard. I called the police, filed a report, and changed every lock in the place. But the real damage wasn't what they took. It was what they looked for and didn't find, because I had already moved the files, digital and physical, to an encrypted drive stored at Carla's office. But the message was clear. He was watching, and he was getting desperate. Still, we pushed forward. We took the documents to a local journalist, Maya Reynolds, from Channel 6. She had covered elder abuse and Medicare fraud in the past, and after reviewing our case, she agreed to do a story. It wasn't clickbait. It wasn't some viral expose. It was real journalism timeline. Facts, interviews, no names revealed yet, but the skeleton of Richard's scam laid bare on regional TV, and it sent shockwaves. Within a day of the segment airing, we got 3 anonymous emails. each one from someone claiming to know Richard personally. One was a former client, another an ex-girlfriend. But the third changed everything. It came from a private investigator. Subject line, your uncle, offshore account connections. Body, I worked surveillance for a client suing Richard Harper in 2020. Thought he skipped town, never caught him. But your report reopened some old red flags. Call me. Attached was a photo, blurry, grainy but unmistakable. Richard, on a pier, in Belize, shaking hands with a man later indicted for money laundering. This wasn't just elder abuse. This was organized, layered, intentional. And if we were right, if he'd been laundering GoFundMe money, siphoning funds through shell corporations, then we weren't just dealing with a family betrayal. We were dealing with federal crimes. And Richard, he was running. 2 days after that email, Grandma got a letter. No return address, no stamp, just a sheet of paper inside an unmarked envelope. One sentence, typed, "You're making a mistake. I always protected you." She called me in tears. Not because she believed him, but because she finally understood he never saw her as a person, just a resource, a tool, a means to an end. She told me she was ready to testify, that she didn't care if it meant digging up decades of family secrets. And as she hung up, she said something I'll never forget. Let's finish this together. Which brings us to now. Because tomorrow, we're filing criminal charges. But before we do, Carla wants me to go back through one last folder, something she missed the first time around. One labeled Only Inheritance Confidential. And what we find in that folder might not just destroy Richard, it might expose someone else in the family, too. The folder was heavier than it looked. Inheritance Confidential. That was all it said. Simple, understated, tucked beneath stacks of fake invoices in Richard's storage unit, like a sleeping grenade waiting for the right hand to pull the pin. Carla and I sat in her office, rain tapping against the windows like nervous fingertips. The walls were lined with law books, but the only thing that mattered in that moment sat between us on a polished oak table. She peeled back the flap and slipped the contents out with gloved hands. One thick legal envelope, 3 notarized documents, and an old cassette tape. A cassette. I felt my stomach knot. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. She unfolded the first page. Her brows slowly rose. She didn't speak right away, just scanned the lines, lips tightening. "This," she finally said, "is your grandfather's amended will." I blinked. What gnome grandpa died in 2015? The will was settled? The house was divided? Grandma got power of attorney and… This is dated 4 months before he passed, with a witness signature and notarized. Carla handed it to me. And there, in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, was a single paragraph that changed the entire story. Should Evelyn Harper become incapacitated, or should my legal representatives determine any undue influence upon her assets by a family member, I request an immediate audit of all financial agents, including Richard Harper. In such a case, I transfer financial custodianship to my granddaughter, Alexandra Harper. My heart stopped. Me? Carla nodded. He tried to protect her. He knew something wasn't right, but it was buried, likely overwritten by a newer POA Richard pushed after your grandfather passed. I was stunned, numb. I barely noticed her sliding the second document across the table. "That one," she said, "is a letter of objection never filed, but signed by your Aunt Marissa." I read it slowly. It was dated 3 years ago. "I object to Richard Harper's sole management of Evelyn Harper's medical and financial matters. I've witnessed behavior I believe to be coercive." She never submitted it. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought no one would listen. Maybe, like me, she underestimated just how dangerous silence could be. And then, there was the cassette. We had to find a player. Carla eventually dug one out of an evidence bin her firm used for archived depositions. It clicked, hissed, then Grandpa's voice crackled into the room. Clear, direct, recorded with urgency. "If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. I don't trust Richard. I haven't in a long time. He's smart, too smart, the kind of smart that knows how to make theft look like care. If Evelyn's being told not to ask questions, if money starts disappearing, if my granddaughter Alexandra starts asking questions help her, she's the only one who doesn't look away." My chest tightened. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. This wasn't just evidence. It was Grandpa reaching across time, telling me I wasn't crazy, that everything I felt, the dread, the anger, the isolation, was real. He saw it coming, and he trusted me to finish what he couldn't. We filed the petition the next morning. Armed with the will, the letter, the tape, and everything else we had gathered, Carla motioned to freeze all of Richard's assets. At the same time, APS issued a warrant for his arrest under suspicion of elder financial exploitation and fraud. But Richard was gone. No trace of him in Dayton, no activity on his cards, no travel logs. It was like he vanished into thin air. Until Darren called again. He's trying to cash out. He said he's not going to prison, he's going to disappear. How do you know? Because I know where he always said he'd go if it came to this. Somewhere no one would expect. Somewhere he already has another name. With the AG's office watching the airports and Carla chasing the LLC trail, I made one last stop, Grandma's house. Not because I needed more evidence, but because I needed to see her one more time before everything changed. She was sitting by the window, wrapped in that same wool cardigan, sunlight catching the silver streaks in her hair. "You did it," she said softly as I walked in, "didn't you?" I nodded. "We're almost there." She smiled, not wide, just peaceful. Then she reached over to her side table and held something out. It was a ring box. Not velvet, not new. Worn, cracked at the corners. Inside her wedding ring, the real one. "I want you to take this back," she said. "I know you gave it to me after Thanksgiving, but I want you to keep it, not as a symbol of what's gone." She looked me in the eyes. "But what's coming next?" And just when I thought I was prepared for anything, the news broke. Channel 6 aired a follow-up story. An anonymous source, Richard himself, had leaked a letter to the press. A letter claiming I had manipulated Grandma, that I had forged the ledger in the attic, that the safe was planted, the audio doctored, the evidence cherry-picked. It was a full smear campaign, complete with photos, fake timestamps, and even a false testimony signed by someone named Gregory Harper, a cousin none of us had ever met. But that wasn't the worst part. In the final paragraph of his leaked letter, Richard named someone else as his accomplice, someone who had co-signed the Belize transfers, someone who had helped redirect GoFundMe funds in exchange for a payout. He named her Marissa, my aunt, the one who'd cried at the table, hugged me after Thanksgiving, shared passwords and guilt. Richard was throwing her under the bus. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't innocent after all. When I first saw Marissa's name in Richard's letter, my chest caved in. My aunt, the woman who baked lemon bars for Grandma when she was too weak to eat solids. The woman who cried with me while watching old family videos last Christmas. Was it all a lie? I didn't want to believe it, but denial is a dangerous comfort. I knew better now. I couldn't let nostalgia blind me again. So I called her. Straight up, no texting, no warning. She answered after 3 rings. "Alex," she said, breathless, like she already knew what was coming. "You need to tell me the truth." I said, "Right now? Were you involved in any of this?" Silence. "Then come over." She lived alone, in a brick bungalow on the outskirts of town. The porch light buzzed, casting a dull yellow glow that made her look older than I remembered. She didn't invite me in right away, just stood in the doorway holding a mug of tea, wearing a faded OSU sweatshirt and a look that could melt steel. "I'm not going to deny it," she said, "but you need to understand what happened." And then she told me, back in 2019, after Grandma's first cancer diagnosis, Richard came to her. Not with threats, not with force, with promises. He told her he was setting up a family care trust, a way to protect Evelyn's assets and minimize tax exposure. He said he'd already cleared it with a financial advisor. All she had to do was sign off on a few documents so he could consolidate the paperwork. She believed him, so did I once. But then the monthly statements stopped coming. When she asked, he brushed her off. "Market volatility, temporary hold. We're protecting the principal." Always vague, always confident. Until she found a wire transfer notice in the trash. $25,000 to a Belizean account. She confronted him, screamed at him, threatened to tell Grandma. And that's when he changed. No more soft voice, no more team player act. He told her she could keep quiet and get a share of the eventual payout, or she could risk everything. Her job, her credit, even her house. You really think you'll come out clean in court, he said. You signed the paperwork. So she froze. She didn't help him, but she didn't stop him either. I should have come to you sooner, she said, eyes rimmed with red, but I was afraid. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not a villain, but someone who had been cornered so long she forgot how to fight back. It didn't absolve her, but it made sense. We added her testimony to the case file. Her signature, her emails, her copy of the wire transfer. Carla updated the AG's office immediately. And then we waited. For days, there was silence. Then, on a cold Monday morning, the call came in. Richard had been caught. Not in Belize, not on some private island, but in South Dakota. He was trying to open a new account under a fake name at a small-town bank when a teller got suspicious and ran his ID through a national fraud alert database. They found him in the parking lot, halfway through a burner phone call to someone labeled Eagle. They arrested him on the spot. I wish I could tell you that justice was swift, that the moment he was in handcuffs, everything felt better. It didn't. Court dates were delayed, motions filed, statements collected. But the truth held. Grandpa's tape, the forged checks, the fake hospice services, the inheritance file, Darren's evidence, Marissa's statement. Piece by piece, Richard's empire unraveled. He was charged with financial exploitation of a senior adult, wire fraud, tax evasion, identity fraud, obstruction of justice. His bail was denied. And 3 months later, in a courtroom packed with family, reporters, and 3 retired nurses from Grandma's old hospital, Richard pled guilty to avoid federal trial. At sentencing, I spoke, not out of vengeance, but because silence is what enabled him for so long. I stood, hands trembling, heart in my throat, and said, "You stole more than money. You stole years we could have spent healing. You turned trust into a weapon. But today, we stop pretending. You don't get to hide behind blood anymore." He didn't look at me. He never once did. And that, more than anything, told me I'd won. Grandma's doing better now. The new treatment worked wonders. We laugh more, cook together, rewatch old movies, even the bad ones. She finally told me the full story of how she met Grandpa on a library staircase, of all places. She says she feels lighter, safer, seen. Marissa moved in next door. She's still rebuilding her reputation. She volunteers at a shelter now. It's not redemption, but it's effort. Darren flew in for Thanksgiving. First time in 8 years. He brought his partner, made Grandma laugh until she cried. And me? I went back to work. One client at a time, one blueprint at a time, but I keep Grandpa's cassette on my desk. A reminder of what truth costs and what it's worth. If you made it this far, thank you. This wasn't just my story. It's a story about how family can fail you and how you can still fight back. A story about silence and the courage it takes to break it. And if you are watching this, wondering whether it's worth it to speak up, it is. Even if your voice shakes, even if they tell you you're dramatic or bitter or wrong, even if it means standing alone in the rain with a pie no one wanted, because someday, someone will hear you, and they'll know they're not alone, either.